I walked out of Mercy General with a cardboard box in my hands and a termination letter in my pocket, all because I refused to let a man die over a paperwork error. The rain was coming down hard in Seattle that afternoon, but I did not even feel the cold water soaking through my scrubs. I just felt numb. A kind of hollow emptiness that sits in your gut when you realize doing the right thing is the fastest way to ruin your life. I looked back at the sliding glass doors one last time and saw the security guard, a guy named Mike who I had shared coffee with for 3 years, refusing to look me in the eye. That hurt worse than the firing. He knew I was not a criminal. He knew I was a good nurse. But in a place where policy matters more than a pulse, I was a liability. And liabilities get cut. It all started 24 hours earlier on a shift that was supposed to be quiet. I was working the night rotation in the ICU and my feet were already throbbing before I even clocked in. I needed this job bad. I had student loans breathing down my neck and my little sister's tuition to help out with back home in Ohio. Every dollar I made was accounted for before it even hit my bank account. I was playing the game of life on hard mode and I was barely winning. Then they wheeled in Mr. Henderson. He looked like he had been dragged through a storm and left out to dry. His clothes were worn-out flannel and dirt-stained denim. He had no wallet, no ID, and no insurance card on him. Just a wheezing chest and a fever that was cooking his brain from the inside out. The paramedics found him collapsed near the bus station. When they transferred him onto the bed, he groaned, a low rattling sound that made the hair on my arms stand up. I knew that sound. That was the sound of lungs filling up with fluid. That was the sound of a clock ticking down. I got to work immediately. I hooked him up to the monitors and checked his vitals. His oxygen saturation was tanking. He was drowning in his own body. I grabbed the chart and ran to the nurse's station where Mrs. Gable was sitting. Mrs. Gable was the night shift administrator and she was a woman who loved rules more than she loved people. She had a face that looked like she was constantly smelling sour milk and a heart that was probably 2 sizes too small. I slammed the chart down on the counter. I told her bed 4 is crashing. He has acute pneumonia and likely sepsis. We need to start him on piperacillin and we need to do it 5 minutes ago. Mrs. Gable did not even look up from her computer screen. She just tapped a few keys and adjusted her glasses. She asked if we had an ID on him yet. She asked if we had verified insurance. I told her, "Are you kidding me? The man is unconscious and turning blue. We do not have time to run a credit check. He needs the meds now." She finally looked at me and her eyes were cold. She said, "Sarah, you know the protocol. For indigent patients with no ID, we stabilize and transfer to county. We do not use the high-grade antibiotics unless it is code red and approved by a physician who is present. The on-call doctor is in surgery right now. You give him the standard saline and oxygen and you wait." I felt the heat rise up my neck. I told her oxygen ain't gonna cut it. He is septic. If we transfer him to county in this traffic, he will be dead before he gets through the doors. He needs the good stuff. We have plenty of it in the dispense cabinet. She shook her head. She said those meds cost $400 a dose. The hospital is not a charity, Sarah. Do your job and follow the protocol. If you breach the supply cabinet without authorization, it is theft. Do you understand me? She went back to typing. She did not care. To her, Mr. Henderson was just a number in a spreadsheet, a loss on the quarterly report. To me, he was a human being who was scared and alone and dying. I went back to the room. Mr. Henderson had his eyes open now. They were milky and unfocused, but he found my face. He reached out a hand that was shaking and calloused, his fingernails dirty from whatever work he had been doing. He grabbed my wrist. His grip was weak but desperate. He whispered something I had to lean in to hear. He said, "Please. Just please." That broke me. I looked at the monitors. His heart rate was climbing. His body was fighting a war it was about to lose. I thought about my rent. I thought about my student loans. I thought about how hard I worked to get this license. And then I looked at a man who was someone's father or brother or son, begging for his life. I made a choice. I walked out of the room and went straight to the secure medication dispensary. It was locked, obviously. You needed a fingerprint scan and a code to get the expensive drugs. But I also knew that the emergency override key was kept under the counter for power outages. It was strictly forbidden to use it unless the electronic system failed. I checked the hallway. Mrs. Gable was busy yelling at a janitor about a spill near the elevators. The coast was clear. I ducked behind the counter, grabbed the physical key, and jammed it into the lock. I grabbed 2 vials of the antibiotic and a bag of saline. I shoved them into my pockets and locked everything back up. My heart was hammering against my ribs like a jackhammer. I felt like a criminal. But I was a criminal saving a life. I ran back to the room and hung the bag. I injected the meds into his 4-line. I watched the drip start. Drop by drop, the medicine flowed into his veins. I sat by his bed and held his hand. I told him, I got you. You are gonna be okay, Pops. You just hang in there. I stayed with him for 3 hours. I skipped my break. I ignored my other charting duties. I just watched the numbers on the monitor. Slowly, painfully, they started to turn around. His oxygen went up. His fever broke a little. His breathing smoothed out. He fell into a real sleep, not that terrifying unconsciousness from before. Around 4 in the morning, he woke up. He looked at me, really looked at me this time. His eyes were sharp. Blue and piercing. He did not look like a confused homeless man anymore. He looked intelligent. He looked weary but alert. He asked me why I stayed. His voice was raspy. I told him because no one should have to be alone when they are sick. I told him to rest and save his strength. He asked me about the medicine. He said he heard the argument outside the door. He heard the woman say no. I froze. I did not know he was listening. I told him, do not worry about that. I told him I handled it. He squeezed my hand. He said, you risked your job for an old bum like me. I smiled at him. I said, you ain't a bum, Mr. Henderson. You are my patient. And on my watch, nobody gets left behind. He nodded slowly. He did not say thank you. He just said, I will remember this. I thought that was the end of it. I finished my shift, hid the empty vials deep in the trash can in the biohazard room, and went home to sleep. I thought I had gotten away with it. I thought I had slipped one past the goalie. I was wrong. When I came in for my shift the next evening, my badge did not work on the time clock. It beeped red. Access denied. A knot formed in my stomach instantly. I tried again. Beep. Red light. Behind me, I heard footsteps. It was the security guard, Mike, and the director of nursing, a tall man in a suit named Mr. Vance. Vance was the kind of guy who smiled with his mouth but never with his eyes. He looked at me like I was a stain on his carpet. He said, Sarah, come with us. We need to have a chat. They marched me into his office. It was cold in there. The air conditioning was blasting. Mrs. Gable was sitting in the corner, looking smug. On the desk, right in the center, were the empty vials I had thrown away. Vance sat down and folded his hands. He said, we did an audit of the inventory this morning. We came up short on 2 doses of high-grade antibiotics. We checked the security cameras. We saw you use the emergency key. My mouth went dry. I tried to speak but nothing came out. He continued. He said, Mrs. Gable tells me she explicitly denied your request for these medications because the patient did not meet the financial or medical criteria for administration without physician approval. You disobeyed a direct order. You stole hospital property. And you administered medication without authorization. I found my voice. I stood up. I said I saved his life. He was dying. If I waited for your approval or for the transfer, he would be in the morgue right now. Is that what you wanted? Vance did not even blink. He said what we want is employees who follow the rules. This is a hospital, not the Wild West. We have budgets. We have liability protocols. If he had an allergic reaction, we would be sued for millions. You put this entire institution at risk. I felt tears burning my eyes. I was angry. I was so angry I was shaking. I said I put a patient first. Isn't that the oath? Do no harm. Vance stood up. He said, you are fired, Sarah. Effective immediately. We will be reporting this incident to the nursing board. You will likely lose your license. We are making an example out of you. We cannot have nurses playing God with our inventory. They made me clean out my locker while they watched. I had to put my stethoscope, my spare scrubs, and a picture of my little sister into a cardboard box. Other nurses were walking by in the hallway. They whispered. They looked away. No one stood up for me. They were all too scared. They knew if they spoke up, they would be next. The atmosphere in that hospital was fear-based, not care-based. I walked past room 304 on my way out. The bed was empty. The sheets were stripped. Mr. Henderson was gone. I asked Mike the security guard where he went. Mike looked at Vance, then whispered to me. He said they transferred him to county this morning once he was stable. He is gone, Sarah. I felt like I had been punched in the gut. I saved him just so they could ship him off to the overcrowded, underfunded county facility anyway. And I lost everything for it. I walked out into the rain. I sat in my beat-up Honda Civic and just cried. I cried until my chest hurt. I did not know what I was going to do. I had rent due in 3 days. I had no reference. I had a mark on my record that would scare off any other hospital. I was 24 years old and my career was over. For the next 3 days, I laid on my couch in my sweatpants, ignoring my phone. I applied to a few clinics, but I knew it was hopeless. The hospital grapevine is fast. Everyone would know I was the rogue nurse who stole drugs. On the 4th day, my phone rang. It was an unknown number. I almost didn't answer it. I thought it was a bill collector or the nursing board calling to revoke my license officially. I picked up. I said hello. A voice on the other end said, "Is this Sarah Miller?" I said yeah, "Who is this?" The voice was crisp. Professional. It said my name is James Sterling. I am the personal attorney for the Henderson family. I froze. Henderson. The homeless man. I said, "Look, if this is about the hospital suing me, I do not have any money. I have nothing left to take." The lawyer laughed. It was a gentle laugh. He said, "No, Sarah. This is not about a lawsuit. My client would like to see you. He is asking for you personally." I was confused. I said, "Your client? Mr. Henderson. Is he okay?" The lawyer said he is doing much better, thanks to you. He wants to meet. He sent a car for you. It is outside your apartment right now. I went to the window and pulled back the blinds. My jaw dropped. Sitting in front of my rundown apartment complex, right next to a dumpster, was a black limousine. It was sleek and shiny and looked like it cost more than my entire building. A driver in a suit was standing by the door. I grabbed my coat. My heart was racing again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was curiosity. What was going on? Homeless men do not have personal attorneys. They do not send limousines. I walked downstairs. The driver opened the door for me. I got in. The inside smelled like expensive leather and vanilla. We drove for 30 minutes, leaving the cramped city streets and heading up into the hills where the mansions were. The houses got bigger and the gates got taller. We pulled into a driveway that was long and winding. At the top of the hill stood a massive estate. It looked like a hotel. There were fountains and manicured gardens. I stepped out of the car, feeling completely out of place in my jeans and hoodie. The lawyer, Mr. Sterling, met me at the door. He shook my hand. He said, "Right this way." He led me into a library that was bigger than my apartment. And there, sitting in a leather armchair by the fireplace, was Mr. Henderson. But he did not look like Mr. Henderson. He was clean-shaven. He was wearing a suit that looked like it was tailored in Italy. He looked healthy. Strong. He stood up when he saw me. He smiled. He said, "Hello, Sarah. Thank you for coming." I stuttered. I said, "Mr. Henderson, I do not understand. I thought you were homeless." He chuckled. He said, "Please, call me Robert. And no, I am not homeless. I own the Henderson Group. We own hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, and research labs all over the country, including Mercy General." My knees felt weak. The Henderson Group. They were billionaires. They were the ones who funded the new wing of the hospital. I said, "But, why? Why were you dressed like that? Why did you have no ID?" His face turned serious. He motioned for me to sit. He said, 3 years ago, my wife died in a hospital just like Mercy General. She had a stroke. But because of a clerical error with her insurance, they delayed her treatment for 2 hours. By the time they realized who she was, it was too late. She died waiting for approval." He looked into the fire. He looked sad. He continued. He said, "Since then, I have made it my mission to test the system. I go undercover. I dress as an indigent man. I go to my own hospitals to see how the staff treats the people who have nothing. I want to see if the humanity is still there, or if it is just a business." He looked back at me. His eyes were intense. He said, "Usually, Sarah, I am disappointed. Usually, I am ignored. I am left in hallways for hours. I am treated like garbage. But then I met you." I felt tears coming back. I listened as he spoke. He said, "I heard you fight for me. I heard you risk your livelihood for a stranger. You broke the rules because you knew the rules were wrong. You have a moral compass that cannot be bought." He reached onto the table and picked up a file. It was thick. He said, "I heard about your termination. Vance called me personally to brag about how he handled the theft." He did not know he was talking to the patient he had neglected. I gasped. I said, "You talked to Vance?" Robert smiled, and this time it was a dangerous smile. A shark smile. He said, "Oh yes. We had a very long conversation this morning. I explained to him that firing the only nurse who actually did her job was a very bad career move." Robert handed me the file. He said, "Vance is gone, Sarah. I fired him an hour ago. And not just him. The entire administrative board at Mercy General is being restructured. Mrs. Gable is currently packing a box, just like she made you do." I opened the file. Inside was a contract. Robert said, "I do not want you to just go back to being a nurse at Mercy General. That would be a waste of your talent. I am starting a new initiative. A patient advocacy oversight board that will operate in every hospital I own. We will have the power to override administrative red tape to save lives. We will ensure that what happened to my wife, and what almost happened to me, never happens again." He leaned forward. He said, "I want you to run it. You will have a full staff. You will have a salary that is 5 times what you were making. And you will have the authority to fire anyone who puts profit over people." I looked at the number on the contract. It was more money than I had ever seen in my life. It was enough to pay off my loans, help my sister, and buy a house for my parents. I looked up at him. I said, "Are you serious?" He nodded. He said, "You saved my life, Sarah. Now I want you to help me save the system." I signed the paper. The next day, I walked back into Mercy General. But this time, I was not wearing scrubs. I was wearing a suit. I walked through the sliding glass doors and Mike the security guard dropped his coffee cup when he saw me. I walked past the front desk. Mrs. Gable was there, crying, holding her personal belongings in a crate. She looked up at me. Her face went pale. She knew. I walked to the elevator and pressed the button for the top floor. I had work to do. And this time, nobody was going to stop me from saving a life. Sitting in Vance's chair felt weird. It was real leather, the kind that creaks when you lean back, and the office still smelled like his expensive cologne and stale ego. I had been the director of patient advocacy for 3 weeks, and let me tell you, the honeymoon phase was over before it even started. The staff walked on eggshells around me. The doctors, especially the older surgeons who had been there since the Stone Age, looked at me like I was a bug they wanted to squash. To them, I was just a jumped-up nurse who got lucky. They whispered when I walked into the cafeteria. They stopped talking when I entered the elevator. They were waiting for me to fail. They were waiting for the moment the power went to my head or the moment I cracked under the pressure so they could say "told you so." But they did not know Sarah Miller. They did not know that growing up with nothing teaches you how to fight for everything. The real test came on a Tuesday night. It was always Tuesday nights that went sideways. The ER was slammed. We had a pileup on the interstate and a flu outbreak hitting at the same time. The waiting room was a war zone of coughing people and crying babies. I was doing my rounds, not sitting in the office pushing papers like Vance used to do. I wanted to be on the ground. I wanted to see what was really happening. I heard the shouting before I saw it. It was coming from Trauma Bay too. I picked up my pace. I walked in and saw Dr. Higgins, the chief of surgery, standing over a gurney with his arms crossed. Higgins was a brilliant surgeon, but he had a god complex that could fill a stadium. On the gurney was a teenage boy, maybe 16. He was unconscious, his face pale and clammy. His leg was mangled, wrapped in bloody gauze. Standing next to him was a woman who looked like she was about to collapse. She was wearing a fast food uniform, crying, begging. I stepped into the room. The air was thick with tension. I asked, "What is the hold up here?" Higgins turned to me. He rolled his eyes. He said, "Look who it is. The hall monitor. We are handling it, Sarah. Go back to your office." I looked at the monitors. The kid's heart rate was erratic. I said, "It does not look like you are handling it. It looks like you are arguing. Why is this patient not in the OR? His leg is crushed. He is losing blood." Higgins sighed like I was a toddler asking why the sky is blue. He said, "We are waiting on verification. The mother here says she has insurance through her employer, but the system is down. We cannot verify coverage. And this surgery requires hardware that costs 20 grand. I am not cutting until I know who is paying for the screws." The mother sobbed. She said, "Please. I have insurance. I swear. I work double shifts." He was just riding his bike home. "Please do not let him lose his leg." I felt that familiar fire in my gut. It was the same fire I felt with Mr. Henderson. But this time, I did not have to hide. I did not have to steal keys. I looked at Higgins. I said, "Prep the OR. Now." Higgins laughed. It was a cold, dry sound. He said, "Excuse me. I do not take orders from nurses, Sarah. Even ones with fancy new titles. Protocol states we stabilize and wait for financial clearance on non-life-threatening injuries. He will live without the leg if we have to amputate later. I am not wasting resources on a maybe." I stepped closer to him. I was half his age and a foot shorter, but I felt 10 feet tall. I said, "Listen to me very carefully. You are going to take this boy to surgery, and you are going to save his leg. You are going to use the best hardware we have. And you are going to do it because I am telling you to." Higgins stepped up to me. He lowered his voice. He said, "You are out of your depth, girl. You think because Henderson gave you a pity job you run this hospital. You do not. I bring in the revenue. I make the decisions. If you want to play boss, go fire a janitor. Leave the medicine to the doctors." The room went silent. The other nurses were watching. The techs were watching. Even the mother stopped crying and looked at us. This was it. This was the moment. If I backed down now, I was finished. If I let him walk all over me, the Henderson initiative was a joke. I pulled out my phone. I did not call security. I did not call HR. I dialed a number that was programmed into my speed dial. I put it on speaker. A voice answered on the second ring. It was Robert Henderson. He said, "Sarah. Is everything all right?" I kept my eyes locked on Higgins. I said, "Robert, I am in trauma too. I have a 16-year-old boy with a crushed leg. Dr. Higgins is refusing to operate because the insurance system is down and he is worried about the cost of the screws. He says he does not take orders from me." There was a silence on the line. A heavy, terrifying silence. Then Robert spoke. His voice was not loud, but it carried raw power. He said, "Put Higgins on." I held the phone out. Higgins looked at it like it was a bomb. He took it. He said, "Mr. Henderson, sir, you have to understand, we have protocols for a reason. This girl is interfering with clinical judgment." Robert cut him off. He said, "Dr. Higgins, do you know how much I paid for that hospital?" Higgins stuttered. He said, I assume a lot, sir." Robert said, "I paid $300 million. And do you know why I bought it?" Higgins did not answer. Robert continued. He said, "I bought it so that people like Sarah could do the job that people like you refuse to do. I gave her absolute authority. If she tells you to operate, you operate. If she tells you to scrub the floors, you grab a mop. And if you ever disrespect her in front of my staff again, you will never practice medicine in this country again. Do I make myself clear?" Higgins went pale. He looked like he was going to be sick. He handed the phone back to me with a shaking hand. He said, "Clear. Crystal clear." I took the phone. I said, "Thanks, Robert." Robert said, "Give them hell, Sarah." I hung up. I looked at the team. I looked at the nurses who had been scared to look me in the eye for weeks. I said, "You heard the man. Or one. Stat. Let's move." The room exploded into action. Nurses were grabbing the gurney. Techs were running for blood bags. Higgins did not say another word. He just scrubbed in and did his job. I stayed with the mother. I sat with her in the waiting room for 4 hours while they put her son back together. I brought her coffee. I held her hand. I told her it was going to be okay. When Higgins came out, he looked exhausted. He walked over to us. He did not look at me with contempt anymore. He looked at me with something else. Fear? Maybe. But also respect. He told the mother the surgery was a success. They saved the leg. He is going to walk again. The mother hugged me. She cried into my shoulder. She said, "Thank you. You saved him. You are an angel." I looked at Higgins over her shoulder. I said, "No. I am not an angel. I am just the nurse who runs this place." That night changed everything. The story spread through the hospital like wildfire. The nurse who took down the chief of surgery. The nurse who had the billionaire owner on speed dial. The atmosphere shifted. It was not fear anymore. It was accountability. The staff realized that the old way was dead. We were not counting pennies anymore. We were saving lives. But the work was not done. Robert had bigger plans. 3 months later, he called me to his estate again. I drove up there in my own car this time. I had traded the beat-up Honda for a reliable SUV, but I kept it humble. I did not want to forget where I came from. Robert was in the garden. He looked healthy, happy. He was playing fetch with a golden retriever. He said, "Sarah, you have done incredible work at Mercy. Patient satisfaction is up 80%. Wrongful death suits are down to 0. You turned the ship around." I said I had good help. And a boss who backs me up. He smiled. He said, "I have a new challenge for you." I laughed. I said, "Oh Lord. What is it now?" "Another hospital." He shook his head. He said, "No. I want to change the law." He explained his plan. He wanted to lobby Congress for a bill that would mandate emergency care regardless of immediate financial verification, backed by a federal fund that he was helping to seed. He called it the Henderson Act. But he needed a face for the campaign. He needed someone who had lived it. Someone who had been fired for doing the right thing. He said, "I want you to testify, Sarah. I want you to tell your story to the Senate." I froze. Me. Sarah Miller from Ohio. Talking to senators. I said, "Robert, I am just a nurse. I am not a politician. I do not know how to talk to those people." He put a hand on my shoulder. He said, "That is exactly why you are perfect. They do not need another slick lawyer. They need to hear the truth. They need to hear about the man in the flannel shirt who almost died because of a spreadsheet." So I did it. 2 weeks later, I was sitting in a hearing room in Washington, D.C. The lights were bright. The cameras were rolling. I was wearing a navy blue suit that I bought for the occasion. Behind me sat Robert and, surprisingly, Mike, the security guard, who I had hired as my head of security. The senator at the head of the table was a stern man with white hair. He looked down at me over his glasses. He said, "Ms. Miller, your actions were technically theft. You stole hospital property. You violated policy. Why should we view you as a hero and not a liability?" My hands were shaking under the table. I took a deep breath. I thought about Mr. Henderson gasping for air. I thought about the Martinez boy. I thought about Mrs. Gable and Vance and all the people who forgot what it means to be human. I leaned into the microphone. I said, "Senator, you are right. I broke the rules. I stole 2 vials of antibiotics. And if I had followed your rules, a man would be dead." I looked directly into the camera. I said, "We have built a system that treats healthcare like a luxury product. We check wallets before we check pulses. We worry about quarterly earnings instead of human suffering. I was fired for saving a life. That should not be possible in this country. A policy that kills people is not a policy worth following. It is a crime. And until we change that, until we decide that a human life is worth more than a line item on a budget, we are all guilty." The room was dead silent. I could hear the cameras clicking. I continued. I said, "I am not asking for a medal. I am asking you to make sure that no other nurse has to choose between their career and their conscience. I am asking you to pass this bill so that when someone falls down, we help them up. We do not ask them if they can afford the hand." The video of that testimony went viral. It got millions of views. People started sharing their own stories. The pressure on Congress was immense. The Henderson Act passed 6 months later. It was a victory. A huge one. But the moment that mattered most to me wasn't the signing ceremony. It wasn't the magazine covers or the interviews. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon at Mercy General, about a year after I took the job. I was walking through the lobby. I saw a young nurse, new hire, arguing with a billing clerk. The clerk was shaking his head, pointing at a computer screen. The nurse was holding a chart, looking desperate. She looked like she was about to cry. I stopped. I watched. The nurse slammed her hand on the counter. She said, "I do not care what the computer says. That patient needs a CT scan now. If you will not authorize it, I am going to take him down there myself and scan him, and you can bill me for it later." The clerk looked at her. He looked scared. He typed in the override code. I walked over. The nurse saw me and froze. She thought she was in trouble. She thought the boss was going to yell at her for causing a scene. She said, "Ms. Miller, I am sorry. He needed it." I smiled at her. I saw myself in her. I said, "What is your name?" She said, "Emily." I said, "Emily, do not ever apologize for doing your job. You did exactly the right thing." I took a pin off my lapel. It was a small gold pin with the Henderson Group logo on it. I handed it to her. I said, "Keep fighting, Emily. We have got your back." I walked away, heading toward the exit. The rain was coming down outside, just like the day I was fired. But this time, I wasn't carrying a cardboard box. I wasn't crying. I walked out to the curb where my car was waiting. Mike held the umbrella for me. He said, "Good day, boss." I looked back at the hospital. I saw the lights in the windows. I knew that inside, people were being taken care of. I knew that because of one choice, one scary, reckless choice to help a stranger, thousands of people were going to be okay. I looked at Mike. I smiled. I said, "Yeah, Mike. It was a good day." I got in the car. We drove off into the rain, but the world didn't look so gray anymore. It looked like there was hope. And that is all we ever really needed.